We get started.
Okay.
All right. And I'm going to figure out here how to hit record.
I'm already recording.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Glad to have everybody with us this evening. And today we actually have a great lineup on stream care. And with us this evening is Dr. Amanda Gumbert. And Dr. Gumbert is the Extension Water Quality Specialist at the University of Kentucky. And so she comes from us live from Lexington. And Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. Like Jeremy said, I'm Amanda Gumbert, and I work at the University of Kentucky and serve the whole state. So we're going to talk a little bit about taking care of streams tonight, and just some basic information that hopefully everybody can use and take to heart. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see my slides. And I can get there we go. Hopefully you can see those now.
Looks good.
All right. So we're going to, just to give you a little overview, we're going to talk a little bit about why you should care about water, and then talk about challenges that we have for our streams. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some tips for taking care of our streams. And I usually start my talks with a couple different ways, but one way I like to start is this quote from Luna Leopold. And if you're familiar with Aldo Leopold, Luna was one of his children who was worked for the USGS as a geomorphologist or stream morphologist, and he said water is the most critical resource issue of our lifetime and our children's lifetime. The health of our waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. And this was a quote from probably like the 1970s or 80s, something like that. And I just feel like this is, it really hits home and reminds us that everything that we do on our land impacts our water quality, and it really does reflect how we're taking care of the land. So just something for us all to think about. And if we think about why we should care about water, this little diagram basically just tells us that the bottom line is we don't have a lot of it that's available to us. Of all of the water on Earth, only about 3% of that water is fresh water. And then of that, we have less than 1% that is available to us as humans to use, that's not tied up in glaciers or held deep underground in groundwater that we can't access. So there's just not much of it for us to use. And of course, I'm not going to get into the water cycle. I'm sure all of us are pretty familiar with that. But that small portion of water that's on Earth is what cycles around and around and is available for us to use every day. So it is really important for us to take care of it, because it's going to directly impact us because we drink it every day and need it. And it's a little hard, though, to think about water scarcity or not having enough water when a lot of our communities over the past few weeks have kind of looked like this. And so it looks like we have plenty of water. And we do. It's just in Kentucky, especially in the eastern part of the US, we are typically blessed with plenty of water. It becomes a water quality issue more so than a water quantity issue. On the other side of the Mississippi River, though, water quantity certainly becomes a concern. So this map shows us Kentucky's river basins, and this is just a way for us to organize our rivers and our river basins, or our watersheds, our large watersheds. And so each color is a different river basin, and but all of those do eventually end up either draining to the Ohio River or directly into the Mississippi River in a small portion of Western Kentucky. Now, this map shows the Virginia and West Virginia river basins. And so now the difference here is that not all of those watersheds, of course, you see a little tip of Kentucky there on the western side of that map. And not all of these watersheds will flow to the same location. So part of Virginia's watersheds and West Virginia's watersheds will go into the Ohio River Basin, and then some of it goes into the Chesapeake Bay. So, and I'll show you a bigger map in a few minutes, but this is just to kind of get us thinking about I like to kind of pull back a little bit and look at a map and see it from a different perspective. We all see what our landscapes, that our homes and where we work and where we live, but it's also good to think about water from a bigger scale in terms of how we all impact it and interact collectively. So our streams have lots of different appearances, right? We have some that have a nice shading and maybe a wooded area. This is a picture from the stream in Robinson Forest, so that's very wooded. But then we have some streams that aren't, and some streams that are basically used right up to the edge. In this case, it's mowed to the edge. We do have some large trees adjacent to the stream, but still there's a lot of area that's mowed. And then we have streams that look like this. And I don't know about you, but this this really just makes me shudder in terms of what a stream should look like. And this is kind of an example of what a stream should not look like. And so we'll talk about some reasons it might look like this and why folks have done this. But this is a very manipulated stream system. So let's talk about some challenges that we have for our streams. And so I mentioned earlier water quality and water quantity. And so some of the challenges that we do have for streams, one is the volume, the actual volume of water. And that was pretty evident to us recently when we had heavy rainfall and in a short period of time on saturated soils. So that's a water quantity problem. And then we also have water quality problems. And the three things that are the biggest challenges for our streams, or like the top three pollutants, are sediment, pathogens, and nutrients. And by pathogens, I mean bacteria, typically. And so if you don't take anything else away this evening, one thing to remember, this should be like the take home point, is if it's on the ground, it's in your water. And that's a message that Kentucky's Division of Water for years kind of used that as a mantra for their non-point source pollution education. But it really is a good message. And so just keep that in mind, that if it is on the ground, it is going to get in your water eventually. So when we talk about volume of water, what has happened is as time has gone on and our landscape becomes more developed, we have towns and we have streets and we have sidewalks and buildings, we tend to have more and more impervious surfaces. And that just means things that are, hardscaped. And so when it rains, this doesn't, this leads to more runoff. And so I'll go to the next slide, and I kind of tipped you off there, is what happens when it rains. And I like this diagram because it really shows us what does happen when it rains in an area that has natural ground cover, and that I mean grasses, shrubs, trees, plants, living material, versus an area that has been developed or has pavement or buildings or roads. And so you can see on the left, when you have natural ground cover, about half of the rainfall that hits the ground is going to infiltrate. So whether it's deep infiltration or shallow infiltration, it's still going into the soil. And then the soil is holding it, or it's recharging the groundwater system. 40% of that will evapotranspirate, meaning it might be intercepted by tree leaves or grasses, and then is lost back into the atmosphere from evapotranspiration. And that only leaves about 10% that would actually run off. And then that's going to run off into our creeks and our rivers and streams, our lakes, that kind of thing. But if you go and look at the image on the right, then you see that when you have a developed landscape, that you're losing as much as 55% of the rain that hits the ground to runoff because there's no place for that rain to infiltrate. So when we cover up our soil, then we're going to cover up the area that would soak up the rainfall. And so that's why we see a lot of flooding especially in urban areas or downstream from urban areas, because the rain just has no place to go. And so here's an example of a neighborhood that's developed, and there's lots going on in this picture from a water perspective. It's raining, there's runoff, you see the pipes, those are stormwater pipes coming into that stream. But that stream has been, squeezed into a small, narrow channel. And the developer said, you know what, stream, you're going to stay right here in your banks. And there's no interaction with the floodplain. There's no place for floodwater to go except on downstream. And then they've channelized it underground. So not only is only a little bit of it open to the atmosphere, a lot of it's underground. So in terms of a natural stream, there's just not much left at all. So another thing that challenges our streams is sediment. And so now let's talk about the water quality part of it. And so sediment is a real concern for streams and water quality. Sediment can come from lots of different sources. So stream bank erosion, there is a ton of sediment that, erosion's a natural process. And so when we have heavy rain events, then we have a lot of water moving, have a lot of velocity, and you start to churn up the sediments, not only that are on the bottom of the stream, but also eroding the stream banks themselves. So a lot of sediment that gets into streams is actually coming from the stream banks. And I'll talk a little bit later about ways that we can protect our stream banks and kind of armor those stream banks and protect them from erosion. Of course, we have construction that happens in and along stream banks, or even not near stream banks, but in urban areas. If you have construction and you have sediment lost, and that can get into stormwater systems, and then that eventually gets into a stream or river. So if you don't know, stormwater is not treated. So the water that runs into storm drains on a street or in a town, that does not get treated. Only the black water that's flushed down the toilet is what goes to the wastewater treatment plant. So sometimes our kids don't understand that. They think the water going down a drain is going to go to the water treatment plant. And that's just not the case when we have stormwater going into a storm drain. And of course, agricultural activities like tillage, even overgrazing, can lead to sediment loss, because anytime you have bare soil, you have the possibility of losing soil and losing sediment into the stream. Here's an example of some natural erosion. This is in a forested landscape, and sometimes our streams, like I said, erosion's a natural process. Stream banks just erode, but we can try to do things in our management strategies to protect those stream banks. And there's another example of a pasture-based system. And this is actually on my family's farm. I was getting after my dad for not fencing his streams off and restricting livestock access. And he kind of rolled his eyes, and then he decided to get rid of his cow. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but probably not. But anyway, there's a willow there on the left bank, but you can see that grass had been grazed up to the edge and or mowed, and over time, you just start to lose the roots that were protecting your stream banks. Another challenge that we have for our streams are pathogens. And so pathogens, like I said earlier, are mostly what I'm talking about here is bacteria. And so the bacteria can come from a variety of sources. One can be failing septic systems or sanitary sewer systems. We have lots of old structures in the South. I know I listened to a webinar a couple of months ago from a lady working in Alabama, where she was seeing how many straight pipes still exist, and that's pretty consistent across the South. And having those straight pipes, unfortunately, means it's a direct discharge of bacteria into a stream, or the potential for it. The same thing happens with sanitary sewers in developed cities, towns, in that if the sanitary sewer system is not adequately sized, which has happened actually in Lexington the last 10 or 15 years or so, the city has been upgrading their sanitary sewer systems because they had sanitary sewer and storm sewer interconnections, which meant when we had heavy rainfall and the storm sewers filled up, sometimes they would overflow, or the sanitary and the storm would combine, and then those would result in sanitary sewer overflows. And so it's not a rural issue or an urban issue, it's both. So another source of pathogens is our livestock. So when we have livestock that have access to streams, especially cattle, they seem to be pretty indiscriminate about where they urinate and defecate. And so if they're in the stream and the urge hits them, they just go right ahead. And so we also introduce bacteria into the system that way, or from runoff. And of course, we have wildlife, and they can contribute as well. I know sometimes wildlife gets the blame. I would say Canada geese are probably the biggest blame for wildlife that, in my opinion, from what I've seen, natural stream systems that have wildlife interaction typically don't have a lot of pathogen issues. But when we have ponds and lakes and stuff like that, sometimes that attracts geese that don't go back to Canada anymore. And so they hang out, and they tend to like the Kentucky weather, and so we do have issues with pathogens from wildlife as well. Somebody shared this a magnet with me, and so this is on my refrigerator, and so I think it's just kind of funny, but it is also heartbreaking in a way. It says, in wine there is wisdom, in beer there is freedom, and in water there is bacteria. And it's supposed to be funny, but it really is a bit sad, because indeed we do have places that are not safe for us or our kids to play in. This is an example of a creek in an urban area that had a sign warning people to stay out of the creek, that the creek may contain raw sewage. And I don't know about you, but I grew up playing in creeks, and I want my son to be able to play in creeks and explore those and learn about them and become passionate about them. And when you have to tell kids that they can't play in a creek because it might make them sick, it just really it's really frustrating, and it's heartbreaking. And but unfortunately, that's the case in some places. So another challenge that we have for our streams are nutrients, and that is too much. And so a lot of times we hear the term nutrients and we think, oh, nutrients are good, right? That's what I eat. That's what makes me healthy. That's what helps our kids grow and be strong. But we're talking in this case about too much nutrients. And so this is excess fertilizer. When we talk about the nutrients, it's typically nitrogen and phosphorus that we're concerned about. So coming in the form of excess fertilizer, also animal manure. Sometimes it could be just runoff from concentrated animals, or it could be that we're not utilizing soil tests well, and we're applying animal manure, we're applying fertilizer in an agricultural setting when we haven't tested the soil and to determine what we actually need. And I would add to that, it's not just in agricultural settings, it's also in urban and suburban, or even rural settings too. If you're adding fertilizer to your lawn or your landscape, make sure you do use a soil test, because that's where we lose a lot of nutrients. We can also get nutrients into our waterways from human wastewater. And so I mentioned that before with pathogens, but the same thing is true with nutrients. Even when we have our water sent to a wastewater treatment plant, that wastewater treatment plant can only remove so much of the nitrogen and phosphorus. And those treatment plants do have permits to operate, and they have goals that they are to reach for reducing the nitrogen and phosphorus in their discharge water. But eventually, some of that water, of course, that water is discharged back into a stream after it reaches its final treatment stage. And it's not economically feasible for the treatment plant to take all of the nitrogen and phosphorus out. So just know that there is that wastewater treatment plants are a big contributor of nutrients into our streams and rivers. And I added wildlife there too, because of course they are a source. So to talk a little bit more about the nutrient issues that we have in the US, and I'm showing you on the left, there's a map of the United States, and all those colored areas collectively are the Mississippi River Basin. So all of that area, so about 40% of the continental US drains to the one common location. So that's all of the Mississippi and Atchafalaya River Basin, and that drains down into the Gulf of Mexico. And if you followed water science the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, you maybe have heard more about this, and that is the dead zone or the hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And so the map on the right shows you that runoff from farms, which are green on that map, and cities, which are red or pinkish, carry nutrient-rich water to the Gulf of Mexico. And so what happens is when we over-fertilize, or when we have manures that are on the surface, or when we have wastewater that's not properly treated, or even properly treated wastewater that is discharged into ultimately the Mississippi River, it just collects into a large quantity of nutrients. And so we get this loading of nutrients that heads down the Mississippi River and creates this large hypoxic or dead zone every summer. So every summer it's measured. Here's a map of what it looked like in 2017. And so this was the largest dead zone that was recorded since they started the standardized measurement. And this was the largest size that was ever recorded. So that's 2017 at 8,700 square miles. It's like 5.6 million acres. That's a huge area. You might notice that the ends are directly cut off. They maxed out their resources for this cruise when they were going out and measuring water quality. And what they're doing is they're dropping sensors down in the water. So they're measuring dissolved oxygen. And you see that in that little box on the left, that legend, and it shows you the bottom oxygen. So they're measuring dissolved oxygen in the water column. And that dissolved oxygen is necessary, of course, for fish and shellfish to live. And so if it's below 2 milligrams per liter, then the fish and shellfish can't live there, and so it's considered a dead zone. And you might remember, if you've done some stream study with macroinvertebrates, we like to see 8 to 10 milligrams per liter for a healthy stream system. And so even you see some of the edges are greater than 5. So there's just not much oxygen that's in the system at that point. By comparison, here's 2020's survey. And so this was the third smallest on record from 34 years of surveys. And so this was a result of mixing by Hurricane Hannah. And so a much smaller dead zone, and even, looking at where they mapped, you see there's a lot of the area that has a higher oxygen content. So this is subject to ocean currents and mixing and that kind of thing, but it is attributed to excess nutrients coming down the Mississippi River. And I show you this because these two guys that are standing there at the edge of the dock and talking to this crowd. These are two fishermen that I met with a couple years ago, and they took us and showed us their boats. And these are the guys whose livelihoods this is impacting. So all of that map area of the 40% of the United States draining down into the Gulf of Mexico, these are the folks that we're affecting, because their livelihood is dependent upon shrimping. These are shrimpers. So they're going out and trying to catch Gulf shrimp. If there's the dead zone, they're having to go farther out into the Gulf. That requires more petroleum fuel for them to get out there. They're not catching the same amount of catch. And so their businesses are really suffering. And they showed us lots of those boats. Some of those boats look pretty rough and rugged. And they're like, that's because nobody has any money. They're not taking them out, there's not enough fish or shellfish to catch. And so the industry was just struggling. So the message here is, remember that when you're fertilizing the lawn, you're not just fertilizing the lawn, because if it's not used by the plant that's growing there, it's just going to run off and make it into the stream or river or lake, and it could be your drinking water. And in some cases, we have things like this picture is an algae bloom that I went and checked out last fall, and which just kind of it's pretty funky looking. You don't want your child or your pet or anybody playing in that. And this was, a situation where it was a bad algae bloom. And when we have these situations, there's a close up of one of the edges where it kind of looks like paint, and it's just a really thick mat of algae. We can have situations where those algae produce toxins, and those are what we call harmful algal blooms. And those toxins are toxic to humans and they're toxic to pets. And so anytime you were to see something like this, please stay away from it and report it to the Department of Environmental Quality, or somebody who can go and check it out and do some testing on those algae to make sure um, there's not harmful toxins in there. But this is a result of too much nitrogen or phosphorus getting into that water system, and it just creates those algae blooms. So again, remember, if it's on the ground, it's in your water. So those are some kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say depressing, but a little bit, somewhat of a downer of the information. But we're going to switch gears here now, and we're going to talk about some solutions for a healthy stream. And number one on that list is plant in the buffer zone. And if you don't, again, remember, if it's on the ground, it's in your water, but also remember that a number one solution that we can do is plant in the buffer zone. So stream buffers are riparian areas or buffer zones. We might call them streamside management zones when we're talking about forestry. But these are just transition areas between the water body and the upland, or the next, the upland land use. And so in this image, it's kind of that greenish brown color that says buffer zone. And in that area, you would plant trees or shrubs or grasses or forbs, preferably a combination of those things. And what that's going to do is just going to help protect the stream itself. It serves, just as it says, as a buffer between the upland land use and the water itself. This is a kind of a typical preference, and this is an NRCS image. And in terms of zones of planting stream buffers, the zone 1 being closest to the stream, and the preference here is that we have large trees right next to the water. So those are going to do a couple of things. The large root systems in the trees are going to help anchor that soil and hold the stream bank in place. But also the canopy of the tree is going to shade the stream. It's going to provide temperature regulation for the water itself. So when we think about streams and we think about our critters that live in there, we're talking about, stone flies, caddis flies, mayflies, riffle beetles, all the good bugs that live in the water. They like to have cooler water because there's more oxygen in cooler water. And so again, they've got to use their gills to breathe when they're underwater, and they're getting oxygen out of the water column. So having shading next to the stream really helps protect that stream temperature wise, and provides cooler water in the summertime. Next up the hill there, you see the second zone, which would be small trees or shrubs. And that's kind of, you think about it like an understory kind of thing. I don't mind having a mix of all these next to the stream, but definitely you want something that provides shading on the water itself. And then on that third zone, you see grasses and forbs, and that's where you get kind of the more prairie-like plantings that are farther away from the stream. But what they bring to the table here is that they have lots and lots of roots. So they have small roots, but really dense roots. And so those small, tiny roots help to filter contaminants. They're going to help take up nutrients, and they're also adding carbon into the soil ecosystem itself. So then you get all of the soil microbes doing their thing in there. And with this diverse system of zones, you really get lots and lots of ecosystem services or benefits that go beyond just water quality. So the benefits of the healthy stream buffers, I've said some of this already, but just to kind of recap on that, stream buffers filter runoff water. They're going to slow water down because also those, in this picture you see, you see flowering plants. Those are black-eyed Susans, and they've got lots of stems, and so grasses and forbs have small stems, but lots of them, and so they can slow water down and help the water infiltrate if it's running off. It can also filter out dissolved pesticides. They can uptake excess nutrients. They protect stream banks from erosion. They can reduce flood damage by holding that soil in place. Buffers provide shade to streams. I mentioned that. And then, of course, wildlife habitat. When you have that diversity of plants there, then you're playing host to lots of different species for wildlife habitat. And in my opinion, and I think most people would agree, it's really an improved aesthetic versus having just an area that's mowed right to the edge of the stream. So, and one thing I want to point out on this picture is that flash of color of all those plants in bloom at one time. I hear people sometimes that really object to having stream buffers. They want to just have a really tidy and manicured landscape. But having things that are blooming, to me, I mean, that's a nice alternative to a mowed landscape. It looks very much on purpose. So if you're interacting with folks and they're like, no, I don't want to have a wild and woolly landscape next to the stream, this is a nice alternative of planting deliberately to have something that is really pretty. So if you can't tell, I'm really a fan of buffer zones. Number 2 is don't mow in the buffer zone. And so I just tell you to see number 1. So go plant in the buffer zone. Don't mow what's in the buffer zone. And this is just an ugly picture of an urban stream that has been mowed. Now, I will say they hadn't gotten the string trimmer out and mowed that clump of fescue right to the edge, but I'd say it was coming soon. The problem that if you notice, 1, we've got eroded stream banks. 2, we've got trash in the stream, and we've also got grass clippings in the stream. That's another way that we can add nutrients into the stream that we don't want in there, is when we mow and the grass clippings go straight into the water. So that's something to really think about. And it takes a lot of effort to mow a stream bank because sometimes it's pretty steep and you're maybe putting yourself in a precarious situation with a lawnmower or even your string trimmer. Okay, so number 3 is keep your septic system in good condition and watch what you flush. So I know this isn't something that we always talk about much, but unfortunately for my son, he gets to be a model a lot of times when you do extension programs. But he's on the left there giving you the thumbs up that you flush toilet paper and what comes out of your body, and then that's it. I put this picture together. Especially early in the pandemic when we were all sanitizing everything and using lots of disposable wipes. But just to remind folks that even though you might see something that says it's a flushable wipe, that doesn't happen. They don't break down in your septic system. They don't break down in a sanitary sewer system. They just cause a lot of clogs. And so when you have clogs and you have sanitary or septic system backups and overflows, and that's just not anything any of us want to do or deal with. So you only flush what's appropriate. And also, if you do have a septic system, make sure that you maintain it and have it inspected or pumped every 3 to 5 years. That's our university recommendation. Pick up litter and be careful in the floodplain. So picking up litter is always a good idea. It's it's great weather. We're in the springtime and we're moving toward April. Always has lots of Earth Month or Earth Day activities, and picking up litter is it really an easy thing that you can do. You can do it as a solo event and stay in and remain socially distant, or you can do it as a family or maybe organize a community cleanup event. because anything that's on the ground, again, is going to get in your water, and that includes litter. And so, litter that's in trash, that's in roadside ditches or on the road or wherever, that's eventually going to get in your waterways. And, I have a colleague who always has trash bags in her truck because every time she goes out to look at a stream, she takes a trash bag with her because she knows there's going to be trash and she picks it up. So make sure you educate your family members too, not to litter. And I included this picture too. It's of course of flood debris, but keep in mind that if you have things in the floodplain, they will be subject to being washed away. And when things are washed away, they don't really go away. They end up somewhere and can cause litter issues. So keep that in mind too. My family and I canoe some, and a lot of times we'll see things like agricultural plastics, like bale wrap and stuff like that. Unfortunately, that blows away and gets into streams, or soft drink bottles, potato chip wrappers, that kind of thing. And you know, it's just something that we can do. We can do better, right? We can do a lot better by picking up after ourselves, and even picking up after others who maybe don't know any better. Number 5 is don't change the path of streams, and that just means don't be an engineer unless you are an engineer. And this is an example of a stream that it's a small little ditch runoff area, but it kind of shows us that we like to pretend that we know what to do with streams, or we want to tell streams what to do. And nature typically wins when we do that. These are temporary fixes, I say quote fixes, when we try to manipulate streams. And so this is a second picture of that other stream I showed you earlier. And this is a situation where the stream has been straightened. So streams naturally meander or kind of move in a bit of an S shape along the landscape. And in this case, the stream was straightened. And then the gabion baskets were put on the stream bank to hold that stream in place. And then we have a house built in the floodplain. And, this, I don't, I'm not, there's just a lot you can say about this, but, there's the stream banks are not natural. I'm fearful of what will happen to this house in the long term, and what will happen as if those gabion baskets fail. But those are, an engineering solution to holding that stream bank in place. But when we do that, there is going to be downstream consequences. So we're just speeding the water up here and moving it on downstream, and we might be causing trouble for our downstream neighbors. And the last thing is don't dump anything in streams. And that includes litter, but also any kind of chemical. So don't dump them directly into a stream, but also don't dump them into a storm drain. Because remember, we talked about storm drains are a direct conduit into streams and rivers, and they don't get treated. And so, paint or any type of lawn chemical or agricultural chemical or automotive chemical, please, please, please don't dump that in the stream, because it's going to cause a lot of problems for the wildlife that's there. And if that happens to be contributing to somebody's drinking water, it can also have some really negative health effects. So we've talked a little bit about why you should care about water. We've talked about threats to our streams. And then finally, we talked about some strategies for taking care of our streams. And I'm going to finish up again with this quote from Luna Leopold about water being the most critical resource issue of our lifetime and our children's lifetime. And really, I truly believe this, that the health of our waters is a measure of how we live on the land. And, I don't take that lightly, and hopefully you don't either. I know our lives are very busy, but we ultimately depend on our water resources, and it impacts so much of our lives beyond our health, but also the economy and tourism and wildlife, and supporting healthy ecosystems. If we don't have healthy ecosystems, the rest of us are going to suffer. So I'll stop here with my contact information. You're welcome to send me an email if you have questions. Of course, check out your local extension offices that are available both in Kentucky and Virginia. And I know your county agents will be happy to answer questions there. And if they can't answer them, then I'd be happy to help out as well. So I'll stop there, and I don't know if anyone has any questions. Be happy to answer those.
If there are any questions, you can unmute or type them in the chat box. Amanda, thank you so much. Great information.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask, we have a lot of folks that have yard residential areas that kind of adjoin streams, like what you showed in the presentation. And there's not always sufficient room between the house and the stream to get all of those zones in.
Right.
Do you have any little suggestions for a modified version of what would be appropriate?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you're talking about those kind of landscapes where it's a neighborhood or, you know, the stream runs through the backyards of, you know, of adjacent neighbors and such, it is hard. You can't get those buffer zones like that and structured that way. You know, that's kind of pie in the sky. If you give me, you know, all the room in the world, here's what I want. But you can even put, you know, smaller trees on those stream banks. I like trees because just having that bigger root system. You can do willows that are, and they're quick growing. You will have to kind of watch them after a while. They might, you know, get a little too thick. But, you know, having a few uh, larger trees, if you can put those in, and then maybe even, you know, smaller shrubs, that kind of thing, and just really kind of compact it, right? So take those three zones and maybe squish them a little bit. Maybe have a couple of trees and intersperse that with some understory trees. And with a, you know, an area like that, that's a neighborhood, you're also going to want to make it attractive. You don't, you know, you don't. I mean, I'm fine with letting things grow up and being kind of wild and woolly, but knowing that maintenance is important if you just let things naturally grow. But if you go about a really intentional planting, then it also is aesthetically pleasing and folks can really buy into it, and it makes it look like it's meant to be that way. And so I would just, you know, we have a couple of publications that kind of show examples of how you can create those you know, riparian systems or streamside buffers in just a smaller scale. So, you know, think about what plants. The important thing is to plant the right plant that will deal with the soil moisture that you're dealing with. So, you know, more wetland type plants that are right up on the stream bank or even in the water. And then as you move away from the stream, making sure you're matching the plant with its moisture tolerance.
Do you have any, this is kind of a follow-up to that. Do you have any plants that you would say do a really good job of anchoring the side slope? Because we get that question a lot. Their creek bank is, you know, sloughing off, kind of like what you saw in some of those videos. And in the past, we've recommended silky dogwoods and wild
Yeah.
plums and things like that. Is that still?
Absolutely. Yep, those and buttonbush. Um, Buttonbush is a good one, which is also kind of a wetland plant. Um, those are, you know, silky dogwood and gray dogwood are all ones that they're still, you know, ones that are good for that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else specifically. Um, you know, willows, of course, and you know, now is well, if you'd harvested, you could probably still go out and harvest some willow stakes. You know, things are starting to bud out though now. I don't know if you've had any luck or done any willow staking, but you can just clip off a piece of willow tree that, you know, black willow that's about, I don't know, 2-3 feet long maybe, and about mm, maybe not quite an inch diameter, half-inch diameter or so, and then you just jam that down into the stream bank itself right at the water's edge, and it will sprout and root. And so it's a pretty inexpensive way to get plant material if you've got a tree that you can harvest from.
Very good.
Amanda, kind of on that same deal there. Somebody who's wanting to do it the right way, got a stream bank like Shad was talking about. Are there any cost share monies out there available for a landowner to look into?
There's not any that are that I would call like across the board, statewide or programmatic wide. What I have seen is there are some that are watershed specific. And, that's something that to look for. I know there was at least 2 watersheds in the Kentucky River Basin that were distributing or would give little small mini grants for stream bank plantings. Sometimes conservation districts will sponsor mini grants for plant material. For a while, Kentucky Fish and Wildlife was promoting that through their natural backyards programs. And it really, unfortunately, Jeremy, the answer is that it's really variable. It kind of depends on if there's a watershed that's of focus. And that's something I get a question about a lot is, are these available? And what happens, and I would encourage folks too, that if you have, if you're interested and you have some other landowners in your watershed that you think would be interested, try to seek out grants or projects that would get more than one landowner involved. And then you could potentially write one of your own. So I encourage watershed groups to do that a lot. Or river basin focused groups as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I wish NRCS would do a little more along the line of urban landscapes or suburban, not necessarily agricultural land only, and just, and I have asked that question, at least in Kentucky, and that doesn't seem to be a focus, but we get more and more and more questions. I know, Shad, you're saying you do, and I bet Jeremy, you and Phil do as well, about what to do for these streams. And unfortunately there's some people who own their house lot or a couple acres, and they're also becoming a victim of development that's happening upstream from them, as we have more runoff, and then they're getting erosion where they didn't have erosion in the past. So there's not there's not a widespread across the board solution, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
I had one last question, and it kind of has to do with the litter problem that you talked about. We live in an area that seems to have a huge problem with people littering. And I don't know why it is. I think a sociologist needs to get involved to explain to us why people think that's okay to do. But after something gets in the stream like that, there doesn't seem to be a good program for getting it back out. And I just wondered if there had ever been any discussion about like a clean stream certification where you could start at the headwaters and work your way downstream so that, it doesn't become a problem again. But try to focus on giving people, I guess, a sense of pride that you have something that is special. And if you clean it up, it won't get dirty again, from the people above you.
Right. That's a good question. And unfortunately, not that I know of. I know, Solid Waste several years ago did the Certified Clean Counties program where you would get and you can still see these on the road too as you enter the county. They have a sign that says it's a certified Kentucky Clean County, and it just means, and I for the longest time I was like, what does that mean? Because there's litter right beside the sign. And that was just that they had cleaned up illegal dumps. And so that was that designation. Yeah, I mean, Chad, what you're talking about, unfortunately, is just really widespread. And you're right. It does seem to be that we need to create this sense of pride and sense of it. It's almost like, did we skip a generation of early education about, no litter campaigns. And I don't know, it seems like, there was a generation of lots of focus on recycling. And I wonder if the focus was on recycling and not on actually, oh, by the way, don't throw it out the window, or don't let it blow out the back of your truck. Um, I really wish we could do a better job of that. The thing that I try to focus on and really promote that folks do is go out and pick litter up on the roadside, let people see you, and take pride in that you're doing something good, and share it on social media or challenge people on social media to do a better job of cleaning up their roadways. Or I used to think, well, maybe if we would fine people for littering, but that puts a lot of pressure on our on our police, to something else for them to police. And that's just, there's lots of bigger crimes that probably needed their attention rather than just litter campaigns and anti-litter campaigns. But I also often wonder if maybe we just don't need more of a media push for that. um, I think in the 1970s, the Native American in the canoe ad that many of us saw as young children really made an impact. And
Tennessee had a great one. Since Bill grew up in Tennessee, that ain't no lower class than Tennessee trash. If you remember the guy in the Cadillac pushing furniture out the door and throwing things as he went, we thought that's the nastiest man we've ever seen. And I don't, it had to be effective because Tennessee, their whole economy is based on tourism.
yeah.
And you're not going to have a good tourism economy if people think you live in the garbage dump. So
Yeah, and it is, I mean, if you're going out and picking up trash, I mean, we have a strip of road that my husband and my son and I picked up a couple of times in the past year. And, just driving home the other day, I noticed that it's just as bad as it was. And it almost is like within days, it is back. And I don't know what you do. I don't know how to fix that. There have been several political officials or regulatory agency folks who have chosen that as something they focused on, um, and, with varying success. So, yeah, as far as an overall statewide campaign for that, I don't know of one, but it certainly, there are communities that do, um, river sweeps, and those kind of events, or stream cleanups as community events. Of course, in 2020, most of those didn't happen unless people did them independently. And, so it's more of a thing of just, people being persistent and trying to educate others about taking better care of our landscape.
Jeremy, I set you up for a comment. He mentioned in the message in between while you were talking, he's got this problem where he lives. Um, and the problem, the garbage isn't coming from him, it's coming from up the way. But anyway.
And I think we see that a lot all over.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's everywhere. You see it in town, in the country. You see it, on main roads, on side roads. Sometimes it seems like it gets better, and then it kind of raises its ugly head again. So I feel like the best thing that we can do is lead by example, and try to educate folks on what the negative, it's not just ugly, but it's also detrimental to your water and wildlife that are around. I've seen some social media. Also, a farmer posted that they lost a calf to a plastic bag that had blown into their field, and the calf ate it. And you start to get into people's way of life. And I don't know, I'm not sure what the best solution is, but I think we all just have to do our part and do better. Better, you do better, right?
I always speculated when we were living in Southwest Virginia that it had something to do with it was such a heavily extracted area. Everywhere you looked, you saw, you know, devastated strip mine mountains. And it's like, if you're thinking about why are you going to care about a bag of potato chips when you know the mountain's stripped off. I don't know if you guys are living in coal counties or not, but that was all, because you drive out of the area, you know, in other parts of Virginia, and it's not near as trash. Idaho's not trashed. So it was just, but Southwest Virginia was definitely trashed.
I think I would echo that when you get outside this immediate region, you don't see that so much. From even in other southern states, if you go down into Georgia and parts of Tennessee and those places, you just don't see it, but you sure see it here. So,
You know, I wondered if it's linked to trash disposal options, in terms of, you know, is there universal garbage pickup services? Is that an avoidance of having to pay for that? You know, I grew up in a real rural area, and you know, and I grew up burning trash. It's awful. I hate to even admit that, but like, you know, that was how we disposed of our trash, because there wasn't any kind of pickup service until, you know, later on. And I remember, I mean, like, I inherently kind of, I'm like, this seems wrong. This doesn't seem healthy. But you know, eventually there was pickup service. So I don't know if that's where it's rooted, or if it is sometimes just people being lethargic and not having but you know, Diana, what you mentioned is it could be that it was an area that's like, well, what difference does this little, you know, soda can make if we have devastated landscapes? And I guess my thought on that is kind of back to their, you know, the thought of, well, pennies make dollars. You know, they may not be worth much individually, but you can still collect 100 of them and have $1. And so if you do a little bit and everybody does a little bit, then we can all make our environment a better and healthier and more beautiful place to be.
Yeah, I agree totally with that. It's just, you know, I've worked with several litter programs and trash programs in Wise County, and keep Wise County beautiful and that sort of thing. And it was, we didn't charge people to throw their I mean, they were supposed to pay a fee to go to the waste stations, but they could go for free. Nobody ever stopped them. So I don't think that was the issue. Is just, yeah, they didn't see the need, and it was very unfortunate.
well, Amanda, you did a great job. Thank you for
Thanks.
the presentation.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Well, good to see everybody this evening. And Amanda, thank you again. And Phil, Shad, y'all want to add anything else?
Thursday? Is that a, who is the speaker for Thursday?
Thursday is farm records and taxes.
Okay. Who's teaching that one? I don't have my notes in front of me, so I don't have a clue.
I think you had Heather Graham, maybe.
Okay, Heather's got it. Okay, good deal.
Okay, we just need to get a link for that.
Okay, I will reach out to her and see what she's got.
Awesome, sounds
I'll
good.
talk to you guys when we meet tomorrow.
All right, good deal. Well, glad to have everybody on here this evening. Amanda, thank you again. You still have a few minutes of daylight left, everybody. So Amanda actually has a few more minutes than we do here in East Kentucky. And with Diana, it's just now getting to you. So, but everybody have a great evening.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all later then.
Yep. Thanks again. Yeah,
Thanks,
we're getting
everybody.
6 minutes more of daylight every day. So here, it's
All
bright
right.
and sunny.
All
Yeah.
right.
Bye-bye.